Many observers called it the most significant mass UFO sighting of our time. Now our next speaker, Dr. Lynne Kitei, has been right in the middle of this strange case from the very beginning. So please welcome Dr. Lynne Kitei.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming this afternoon. My name is Dr. Lynne Kitei. I am a medical doctor. Did not want to come forward. But as luck would have it, coming from a background for the last 40 years of community education of vital health issues, starting with NBC in 1976 with Jessica Savage, if anybody knows that name. She was part of the news team, and USA Cable, and starting my own company in '85 called Health Education Learning Programs, which actually produces video workbook curriculums for the classroom worldwide on vital health issues like AIDS and teen pregnancy and substance abuse prevention education programs. Discovery Education is distributing them as we speak. When this fell in my lap, I knew nothing about this topic at all. And you're going to see in the documentary, which actually was produced after I came forward 7 years later, after 1997, when thousands of people saw what I had been documenting for a couple of years. Being an educator and a scientist, I wanted to get to the bottom of it, and actually have been looking for a logical explanation ever since. I've yet to find it 20 years later this March. What you're going to see here is a compilation. It's really a gentle overview of the topic. I wanted to get something out there that could touch everyone, children as well as adults, with just giving them a taste of the topic so that hopefully they will be inspired to go on and learn more, including reading my book, which we're going to go over after the documentary, The Phoenix Lights of Skeptics, Discovering That We Are Not Alone, which ended up to be a 750-page journal when I pushed my whole medical career aside for 7 years after the mass sighting to really research this, and found incredible data that I eventually, after a 750-page journal, squeezed down to the best information that I've had, and it's in its third print now. We have one book left out there, but I can take orders if anybody's interested. But be that as it may, what you're going to see now is really a grassroots effort. This is all done with myself and a filmmaker who had approached me after the book came out. And I had actually gone back to work at the Arizona Heart Institute as the head of the Wellness and Imaging Center there while I was paring down the book. And when I came forward in 2004, coming from the video background, I really wanted to get something out there that was visual and had the people that were involved in the mass sighting, as well as the experts, as well as pilots and military. And you'll see astronaut Edgar Mitchell is in this. He's absolutely wonderful, and a 911 police operator who came up to me after one of my lectures, and she said, I heard that the police said that they only got a few calls. I said, that's right. She says, well, I just retired, and I'm here to tell you there were hundreds of calls that night. I mean, there is so much to this story that the general public does not know. And that was the other reason that I wanted to come forward, just to get the truth out there and to let people know what really happened on March 13th, 1997. There is much more to the story, and you're going to see how it affected people as well. We're going to talk about that more after the documentary. But, you know, I know that there's people out there, everybody comes from a different background, from a different upbringing, from a different belief system. You know, it took 17 centuries before the advent of the microscope for human beings to realize that there are tiny microorganisms all around us, even in our bodies. Some are beneficial, some are pathogens. We've learned to live with it. And the MRI, electromagnetic energies we discovered are around every living cell that helps us detect disease non-invasively. Even though we can't see these tiny living entities or electromagnetic energies or gamma rays or radio waves, it doesn't mean they're not real. We may just be looking on the AM dial for an FM frequency. So it's time we get this topic out in the open and we address it, accept it, and study it so we can find out not only who's driving these things, but also move forward in our own evolution. And we're going to talk about that more during my presentation. But as I was saying, everybody comes from a different background, different upbringing, with different belief systems. Some people can't deal with this topic. Some people don't want to, and that's okay. Everyone in their own time. But now there's data, credible data, that I would like to share with you today, and I applaud the people that participated. Again, this is a grassroots effort, so I hope you can just sit back and enjoy, and then we'll go into some more when it's done. Okay, we'll see you soon.
Ron, yes, weren't they amazing? I mean, I can't even tell you how this was a labor of love, and every single person I asked him, when I was first approached by Steve Lance, I mean, just he and I did this whole thing ourselves. And when I was approached by him, and I was approached by other filmmakers, and I thought, how the heck could I do this? I was working at the Arizona Heart Institute from 7 to 7, doing Barnes & Noble and Borders tours on the weekends, and Coast to Coast AM, and through the night. And he was very, very persistent, and his parents actually live in Phoenix, and his dad is a physician that we knew. And he said, I'm coming with my equipment in May, and we're getting started. I said, whoa. I said, first of all, I didn't have any time. I said, besides the fact that I stayed anonymous for 7 years, how can I expect the professors that could lose their grants, and people that share with me in confidence, which I take very, very seriously, by the way, as a physician. And by the way, if anybody's on Facebook and they want to look up Phoenix Lights Network Facebook page and message me, or go to our website, phoenixlights.net. There, it's packed with information, and you want to share, even if it's just one person, even if it's just me. I take it very seriously. It's all in confidence, and I'd love to hear from you. And we're going to get started with our next phase. By the way, the DVD that you just saw is out there. I have a few left. And not only is it the same thing that you saw today, it's the latest edition, number one. Number two, there are bonus features that are amazing. Astronaut Dr. Edgar Mitchell talks about the cover-up, which I don't really get into. There's also a 93-year young French pilot who saw in World War II the Foo Fighters that were mentioned, these orbs that each side thought the other side had this advanced technology, and it wasn't until after the war that each side found out that nobody did. And he saw them and reported them and tells his story, which is really intriguing. There's also coincidences, and today we're going to be talking about a couple there. If you get the book, there are so many coincidences. I do not believe in coincidences anymore that happened after the mass sighting, as well as paranormal stuff, that just are so serendipitous. And one of them is a month before our mass sighting, and I'm going to be showing you this actually, and I have it on the cover. They're the same exact mile-wide phenomena, one of the craft, and there were many, we're going to get into that, was filmed over St. Petersburg, Russia. We'll get into more of that. But if you do get the DVD, check out the bonus features, because there's a lot more that are just amazing. And just to mention, the coincidence is number one, on March 13th, 1997, not only did a satellite that was built in Chandler, Arizona, they told us, the company told us at Village Labs, that their satellite that's supposed to detect incoming missiles went dead that night. In July, an article in Scientific America in 1997 didn't mention the Phoenix Lights, but talked about strange gamma rays that came into our atmosphere on March 13th, 1997. Then President Clinton, who was at Greg Norman, the golfer's house, was rushed out to an undisclosed location. He supposedly broke his knee, but there's not one picture of that. And if you know Bill Clinton, he would take a photo op, and which is very interesting, and also speculative that we went to DEFCON 3 that night. So there are many coincidences, but those were really poignant that I learned about as I got into the investigation. Anyway, I put this up here because the Phoenix Lights is now considered worldwide as the most witnessed, the most documented, and the most important mass UFO sighting
in modern history, if not all of history. And they're even making jokes all over the world. It is not a joke. But I put this up there because the Phoenix Lights has really gotten a name for itself worldwide. And in fact, I was contacted by the top Chinese physicist and a UFO expert who came to Phoenix primarily to meet with me and to look at my data, and he was not only duly impressed at the 35 millimeter that I've taken, which is the only 35 millimeter of these phenomena, by the way, that has been, went to great lengths to have it explained to me, as I mentioned earlier, at university and military level, and no one can give me an answer, cannot be explained or denied. And he showed me pictures in China of the same phenomena there. And they take it very seriously. And there's an elite group of scientists studying these. Many countries, I found out, are very open to these phenomena as being unearthly. And we're going to talk about today, beyond the Phoenix Lights, a little bit more, not only the nuts and bolts, but how they affected people. And again, I urge you, please take a peek at the Phoenix Lights Network website. It is packed with information. Okay, we just learned a lot from the movie itself, and as I had mentioned, I mean, we have come such a long way just in the last few decades with the Hubble and the Kepler telescope now that are showing us that there are trillions of other galaxies out there, and in those galaxies there's trillions more stars, suns that have their own planets. We also know that the building blocks of life are out there. Nitrogen, oxygen, amino acids, organic materials. In fact, when a star bursts and there's stardust, it's actually, and there are astrophysicists and biologists worldwide that are now calling it panspermia, that this living material, we are made of stardust. And when you consider that our one Milky Way galaxy is about 14 billion years old, and our solar system is a very young solar system, only 4 to 6 billion years old. As I mentioned, there could be beings out there that are billions of years ahead of us. And we can only imagine them looking at us or even seeding us here. In fact, there is a very good case now that scientists are making that we may even have been seeded from Mars, that Mars was very much like Earth at one time. But let's go back to Earth. I'm going to go through this quickly because you did see it in the documentary, but I wanted to point out a couple of things. This is South Mountain. From our view, this is South Mountain, and these are the Australian mountain ranges. This is a car. And you note that the lights on the car reflect, very unlike the true unknowns, which are self-contained. Here are skylights on a house down the street, and you're going to see them consistently in the pictures that I'm going to show you of these phenomena popping up right where South Mountain and the Estrellas intersect. Now, what was really interesting to me once I realized this is that, as I mentioned, I have a company that produces video workbook curriculums on vital health issues, and I was invited, it's a little coincidence, to the Gila Bend Indian Reservation. They have one school, and their sacred ground, very sacred ground, is right in between, in the basin in between South Mountain and the Estrellas. And they don't talk to outsiders, but I had done them some favors, and I called the principal, and I met with some of the board people, and I said, by any chance did you see strange lights on March 13th? And they started to giggle. And I said, is that funny? And they said, are you kidding? We've been looking up at them for centuries. We call them sky people, light beings. I had no idea. That was the first I heard of it. I knew nothing about this topic. And that alone is really poignant, because then I learned that indigenous cultures worldwide believe that there are other intelligences. In fact, the Hopi in Arizona have protocols to invite them in. And they're very open. Many think that these orbs are actually spirit world ancestors coming to give them guidance and comfort and inspiration. And what's really interesting, not only are they told me that the Estrellas got its name because the Spaniards of the day either heard those stories or saw the same phenomena and named the Estrellas. the Estrays, but also they believe that there is a portal or a gateway in this area. And then they showed me petroglyphs, which blew me away. I mean, this formation alone, and there's other petroglyphs too, that are actually look like the boomerang that crossed over Arizona. And this blew me away because it was very similar to what my husband and I saw right outside our bedroom window in '95. Now I'm going to just briefly tell you about it because we're going to go back later because it was analyzed by Navy optical physicist Dr. Bruce Maccabee, my first and last picture of that close sighting. And if you remember, this was 1995, no interest, no knowledge in this topic at all. One wall of our bedroom is a window, and we're pretty high on the mountain there. We lived nestled in the mountains, and it's a private gated community. It's a no-fly zone. And my husband, who's also a healthy skeptic, and it happened to be the night before my birthday, February 6th, I'm taking a leisurely bath. I think he's talking on the phone with my mother-in-law from Philadelphia, who's calling to wish me a happy birthday. And he was on several state and medical boards, and nothing ever ruffled him. And all of a sudden he says, "Get over here quick, what the hell is that?" And I jumped out of the tub and I grabbed my towel, and wringing wet, I'm standing there looking at these three orbs, one on top and two closely aligned underneath. And it was a little below us, and I looked underneath, there was nobody creating. It's very dangerous desert landscape anyway. It was behind the home, and it's all gated, and totally dark. And many people here, I imagine, have had experiences. And you know when you see something, you don't move. You don't move. You just want to take it all in. And I wanted to run downstairs and grab my camera, but you don't know how long it's going to last. So I tried to take in the size, the shape, the color. They were about 3 to 6 feet each. They were actually oval shaped, like an egg on its side. And I noticed there were 3 distinct objects, one on top and 2 closely aligned underneath. And the amber color throughout the orb, and I call it an orb because the light did not extend outside the edge, was a uniform amber color. And it's interesting that many people that see the same phenomena, they don't say it's yellow or orange, or they might say it's yellowy orange. It's amber. That name just pops into your head. Anyway, it didn't glare at all. Every other light out there glared. It was really unusual. And I thought, if I don't get a picture of this, nobody's going to believe it. So I ran to the closet, grabbed my 35 millimeter that I keep handy to take our beautiful sunsets. I collect sunsets, and my husband calls me back. He says, "Get over here quick. One of them is disappearing." Now, it's so hard to describe, but as we watched, in awe, the top orb, without budging from the other two, started to shrink very, very slowly, as maybe if by a dimmer switch, but there was intelligence. It was mechanical. There was intelligence behind it, and it got smaller and smaller and smaller till it was a pea size, till it wasn't there anymore, till we couldn't see it. But it felt like it was still there. Where did it go? Okay? And the only thing that popped in my head, because our kids saw E.T. and Close Encounters, and we had 2 growing boys, and the original Star Trek series, the Romulan cloaking device, that popped into my head. Well, I stepped out on the balcony, and I got a quick picture of the 2 lower orbs, okay? And didn't notice these, which we're going to get to a little later. But after I took the shot, there was such an eerie silence, as if time had stopped. It was just bizarre. And it took a long time for me to share this with anybody, not till after the mass sighting. Jim Delatosa was the first person I shared this with. But going through my mind, I was thinking, as intently as I'm watching these orbs, there's something watching me. Who are you? What are you? Do you know that I'm here? I'd love to meet you. That's exactly what I was thinking. And the next thing I remember is something told me to take a shot, and I took a quick shot as the left bottom orb started to shrink. And that was the only one that turned out at the time, which is amazing, because I had a cheap little Canon Instamatic camera. I caught one half disappeared and one's still there. But I didn't even know who to show it to. I knew no one that was into the topic. I had no idea why this advanced technology was outside our bedroom window, and wondered for 2 years if I'd ever find out. And didn't see anything again until 2 months before the mass sighting. Now, this is really important data. I shared it in the video, but I wanted to in the film, but I want to share a little bit here just to note that this is really important data, because this was 2 months before the mass sighting. And I had noticed the night before, there were 3 in a line. This was January of '97, 2 years after the closed sighting. And I'm thinking, wait a minute, they're amber, they're in a line formation, they're hovering for minutes, and they disappeared, like shrinking from right to left. And the next time my husband was at a board meeting, and I noticed the same 3 in front of South Mountain. As I mentioned, they were below the red lights that were warning airplanes coming into the airport. And I got out there, and what's interesting too is that when I got out there with my camera, I took about 18 seconds worth, and the battery went dead. It was charged, okay? So we don't know what that's about. But when I came out again after I hooked it up, they were gone. And when my husband came up, I said, remember the lights in front of South Mountain? I mean, that I told you about last night there were 3 lights far west. Well, about a half an hour they were in front of South Mountain. And as I'm pointing like this, they just reappeared in the same spot. I mean, it was really, oh my goodness, what's going on? And I ran upstairs, and again, very serendipitous, because when I ran upstairs to grab my 35 millimeter is just about the best way to capture these phenomena, to analyze them, because digital, now that we all have our cell phones, which is wonderful, will break up in pixels. These are in the negatives. They cannot be denied. And as I'm watching the 3 and I'm ready to shoot, 6 pop up on top, I was shaking. And the first picture that I took, you can see that it's wavy because I was shaking. Because not having an explanation for 95, I thought, is this a mothership? Is this a fleet? What is it? But I started clicking away, thank goodness, because the second one is really important. This second picture is exactly what thousands of people would describe 2 months later. 5 lights in a V formation with 2 trailing. Okay, this was 2 months before the mass sighting. And as I'm clicking away, this formation that I was capturing head on was turning into a V. And I ran in and called the Arizona Republic, and as you know, the lights went out, and then the next morning they told me that, that nobody called. Well, I know I called. And then I finally called and found air traffic control. This is another important point. At Sky Harbor International Airport, they were very forthcoming initially. And in the book, I even got together a briefing with them, okay, to find out details. There was a whole group that saw this the night in January, and then again on March 13th. But anyway, I called around, they said they saw it, and what's really significant too, one of them was a meteorologist and said when it first popped up, and it popped up over Class B restricted airspace. There's a 30-mile radius around the center of the airport. Anyone that goes into that airspace, particularly 1,000 feet altitude that these were, must call into the tower, and no one did. So they got alarmed. They looked on radar, nothing on radar. And they took their binoculars, their high-powered binoculars, to look, and in their own words, they said there were 6 points of light, totally equidistant from each other, massive span, that seemed to be attached to something. But they couldn't quite see what it was attached to. And you would hear this again, over and over, by thousands of people on March 13th, 2 months later. They couldn't quite see if it was a field in between or whatever. And of course, other people saw a craft, which we'll get to. But anyway, the meteorologist said that it turned, the whole thing turned to the unit against the wind. That's really important too. And then raised very slowly, and as a unit went behind South Mountain. And as you heard, I said, so what was it? And one of them says, beats me. I said, you're air traffic controllers. You're supposed to know what's in our airspace. They had no idea what it was. They ruled out every conventional, and these are sky watchers, okay? Every conventional possibility, including skydivers with lights, okay? And flares and conventional aircraft, and we kept in contact, and I continued photographing these things up until and including March 13th, 1997. Now, on March 13th, 1997, not only was the Hale-Bopp comet outside, and it was such a beautiful night that night, and people are looking skyward, okay? Think about that. It also happened in 1991 in Mexico, when thousands of people were looking skyward in Mexico, and they saw UFOs as well. I mean, there's a big history of when there's something celestial happening, that these UFOs pop up. Do they know that we're looking up? At any rate, when thousands of people saw, and this is amazing because whatever you've heard,
Okay, there's a lot of mis and disinformation out there. That's one of the reasons I had to come forward after collecting a 50-page data that were of such incredible information that needed to be told. And when you're talking about on March 13th, there were 1 to 2 mile wide and even bigger. I just did I was keynoting in Oregon in May, the Oregon UFO Festival, which was wonderful, and it was just about the Phoenix Lights, and we had Councilwoman Frances Barwood and a witness, and also Peter Davenport, who was the head of the National UFO Reporting Center, and I haven't talked to him for years. And in fact, he was very annoyed with me because I didn't come forward for 7 years, and he knew what I had. But we sat and we talked, and he said, from his estimate, from thousands of reports to the National UFO Reporting Center, that one of these craft, because there were more than one, okay, there were 10 different craft, and he said one of these craft, the Boomerang, a new craft that just God came forward last year to say that it covered Prescott, okay, and one of the other witnesses, and if we have time today, I'll show you that video, said that it went over Camelback Mountain, was 8 miles wide. I mean, it's just unthinkable. But at any rate, these massive craft, or these formations of lights, went right over people's heads. I mean, that's the uncanny thing. I mean, we had people that said they could have thrown a rock at it. It was rooftop level, and as you heard, the pilot was right underneath. I mean, there were many people that were right underneath this thing. And some people saw it take off at blink speed without even displacing the air, without a sound. Other people saw these orbs, and this is an important point, detach from the main object, go out into the environment, and then redock with it. Other people saw gunmetal underneath, okay, and windows and beings at the windows. I describe a lot of that in the book. But the technology itself was mind-boggling, and it's 20 years later. It's 20 years later. We haven't seen a hint of this kind of technology, have we? And if we had this kind of technology, wouldn't you think, with all the strife and everything that's going on in the Middle East, that we wouldn't have shown that we have this advanced technology? At any rate, there was a very good program, and I have to say, not only, and we're going to get to that, were the people transformed in real time and long term in Phoenix and Arizona and beyond, because it wasn't just 1 or 2 hours like you'll hear in the media and it's out there. It was over a dozen hours. Actually, starting about 3 p.m. in the afternoon, there were Native Americans that saw this at 5 o'clock hour in New Mexico, 7 o'clock hour in California. At 11 o'clock hour, there were 2 commercial airlines that saw this thing cover, one of these craft, cover Las Vegas. And it's a very interesting story. I don't have time to get into it, but they tried calling radar, and suddenly a strange voice got on and freaked them out. And they thought, wow, we're mistaken. We didn't see what we saw. I mean, we didn't know where that was coming from. It was near Area 51, when they were near Area 51. And on approach to California, they're 30,000 feet, 140 passengers and crew, and suddenly they see a giant flare outside one of the sides of their aircraft, which was very strange. At 30,000 feet, there's one flare. And moments later, on the other side was a jet with afterburners on it that freaked them. One of the pilots said she fell out of her chair because it was so close. It was dangerously close. And they felt that they were warning them to not say anything, and really freaked them out. Actually, she got in touch with her husband, said, "Don't open the door." But anyway, there was a lot going on, and then, as you heard, at 3 a.m., and these sightings continued. Now, the bulk of reports, and that's why the media picked up on this, was from 8 to 10. I mean, that's when most people were outside looking up at the Hale-Bopp Comet, and it was dark, and that's when most of the reports came in. But these continued throughout the night. In fact, not only was there the call at 3 a.m. to the National UFO Reporting Center that at 8:30 one of these craft was right over central Phoenix, and as jets approached it, the lights blinked out. and then this whole thing disappeared and freaked out one of the pilots. His crewman said he helped one of the pilots out of his aircraft. But at 5:30 the next morning, that's the last report that I'm aware of, and actually was told to me by a Boeing crewman that the whole crew was coming into work at 5:30 in the morning, and one of these massive craft was hovering over their tarmac at Sky Harbor International Airport. So this was happening for many, many hours, besides the fact that it was happening for weeks before. And not only myself, but other people were seeing these phenomena as well. But this is a pretty good report from Dateline NBC because the media is also transforming. Not only are witnesses transforming to a positive place, but the media is starting to take this more seriously. Oops.
Our next sighting even got a governor in on the act. He tried to make a joke of by Dr. Kitei again and again and again, nearly a dozen times over the next decade. But after the
Now, not only that, but I have to tell you that the press conference was called, which was really interesting because there was no investigation. There was no explanation. It was uncanny. I mean, this went right over people's heads, even as a public safety issue. And as we know, Frances Barwood was just blasted when she even asked for an investigation in May. Suddenly, June 18th, front page article in the USA Today. And the internet was just getting started in '97, keep in mind, and there was no social media. And overnight, it went viral. And by the next morning, all the morning shows were showing it, as well as Peter Jennings and Dan Rather and so forth. And the media from all over the world were coming to Phoenix to find out what was going on. We were deluged by media. And once they talked to the witnesses, their reports were so heartfelt and so honest and detailed that they too were saying, why isn't there an investigation? Why isn't there an explanation? That very next morning, the 19th of June, is when the former governor announced that afternoon in an unscheduled press conference, he was going to announce the culprit over Phoenix. It was the first that anybody said anything in the government, and then he comes marching out one of the days in an alien head costume. And I have to tell you, that really was disconcerting, especially with parents that were with kids who saw this thing right above them, and they're trying to make a joke of it, okay? It wasn't a joke, but you know what? After that, I have to tell you, put a lid on it, and he also made a comment that there was hysteria. There was zero hysteria for the witnesses. In fact, to date, 20 years later, there's not one report of harm, threat, or abduction associated with the mass sighting, which is telling in and of itself. I can't speak for other things, but I can for the Phoenix Lights. But there was hysteria, I'm sure, in the government and military, because for the first time, people worldwide were hearing about the Phoenix Lights. They could blow off people's stories and say, well, you know, they didn't know what they were seeing, or it was a balloon, or it was a mirage, or whatever. But they couldn't blow off the videos. Now, the UFOs, the unidentified flying objects, were caught on tape. But the point is that they couldn't blow that off. That was hard evidence. And interestingly, if you really look, okay, at the data, it speaks for itself. We have my video of the 3 endpoints of a giant fear triangle. There we go. Okay. We have, an interesting aside. I just wanted to share this with you too, because I was contacted by a fella who, and call it a coincidence, who actually is a specialist in the Orion constellation, Orion's belt. And if we look to history, Orion's belt is equated with many ancient artifacts worldwide, including the pyramids in Sumerian times, and Egyptian and Maya pyramids, and in mythology, it states that the gods descended from Orion and Sirius and initiated human race. And those who came from the stars started civilization. Well, what was really interesting to me personally, and you know, it took me by surprise, is that this Orion expert contacted me, and he was looking at the data, and I filmed my 3 lights, my footage. You know when the ad comes on for the news at 10 o'clock, like around 10 of, and it was about 9:49, about that time. He estimated that the Orion constellation was directly above where I shot my video that night. Call it a coincidence. Anyway, there's also the arrowhead, and if you look at that footage, if you just look at it, those lights are attached to something, or have a field in between them. Another coincidence is that Steve Blonder had been filming just like I was for days before, and he happened to call MUFON, Mutual UFO Network, up to his balcony that night on March 13th, and they saw the lights and videotaped this beautiful delta-shaped object. And then we have the boomerang, which has really been the only one. Now that's another thing that's really important to clarify is that my video and Steve Blonder's video was taken before 10 o'clock. There's 2 boomerangs that were taken after 10 o'clock. And that's when the military said that they sent off the flares. And actually the boomerang has really been under attack for the last 20 years for being flared. So going back to the hard data, the only hard data they had, even though in video they look different than the real true unknowns. I mean, whoever came up with it was brilliant, because in real life they're huge and they're amber. In the videos they flicker and they're white and so forth. Was brilliant. But again, each of these was exactly what people saw, thousands of people saw. And I'll show you in a few minutes the different craft. There were boomerang craft, there was delta-shaped craft, there were V-shaped craft. It's exactly what people saw. It was like a grand finale to show everybody the lights. When I started looking around, I mean, when this all happened and I found out that thousands of people had seen what I had seen, it really blew me away. I mean, not only was that amazing, that something's going on here, but a week later, I see Jim Delatoso on TV. I had no idea who he was, but he was showing from his vast database this similar triangle craft or triangles of lights from around the world. That was the first that I had heard that it was happening worldwide, and that other countries are much more open to these being unearthly. But when I started really looking into it, because I really did push my entire professional life aside to try to find a logical source and meaning, and I wanted to find the history of this. Well, the history begins when human documentation began. There are caves, primitive caves in Peru and Pakistan of long extinct animals, and yet there's UFOs in the sky. In fact, one of them has a helmeted man, okay, with a UFO, coming out of a UFO. I mean, it's amazing when you really look at the history of this, and then you fast forward to Sumerian writings, Indian writings, even the Bible, Ezekiel's wheel, as we talked about. And then you you go to the 15th and 16th centuries, and you have paintings with frescoes looking up at the sky and beings in those craft. And then 100 years before our mass sighting, interestingly, in 1897, in April, in Kansas, California, Washington, and Canada, they were talking about this huge, massive airship with removable lights. Sound familiar? And that was 6 years before the Wright brothers took flight. And then you fast forward to World War II and the Foo Fighters, and then you get into the 50s, and we have the Lubbock lights. In fact, a student happened to photograph this and took it to the university, and they tried to study it and couldn't decipher what it was. We have the Hudson Valley sightings, and I'm going to go through these quickly because I want to get to the good stuff, but very similar sightings in Hudson Valley. And this was actually shot by a pilot, a 30-year accomplished pilot in Connecticut in the late 80s. Now we have the Belgium. Now Belgium is unusual because not only do they have similar sightings, but they are a model for what should happen, because the military and the government and civilians and scientists all got together to study these phenomena. Don't you think that's what we should do here? I mean, that's what really needs to happen. And then UK as well, they had similar sightings. And again, we're talking about technology that was just unbelievable in the 90s. I mean, we're talking from 10,000 feet in a couple of seconds went down to 500 feet. I mean, that would kill a pilot, okay? And this one really got my attention. Why? Because 1 month before our mass sighting, there was a mass sighting in St. Petersburg, Russia. And a handful of people got video. And what was really interesting, this particular video really got my attention. Because as you see, one of the craft that people saw throughout Arizona was identical. Each light had 3 lights when you really looked at it. And this was another video, which is totally different. Now, whether there was one craft that could morph and look differently, or the perspective from where the person was standing, and we're talking March 13th, But these are videos of their craft, which kind of rules that out. Or a parade, which is what the investigators, after a 12-year compilation of thousands of reports, after March 13th, came to the conclusion. I'm going to show you those in a minute. But this one got my attention because I filmed the same thing. 2005. And then in Italy, another colleague of mine, Paul Harris, was having a conference, and somebody ran in and said, "There's a UFO out there." Well, same thing. There's 3 lights in a V. And this one was very interesting too, because this was a colonel, a pilot actually, for 32 years, that said, "I believe these lights were not of this world, and I feel a duty and responsibility to come forward. I have no idea what they were." He got a lot of trouble for doing this. I found that's interesting too, because an enhancement imaging company took one of these orbs, okay, and what they postulate is that there's a face in this orb. Now, again, going to the Native American thoughts that these could be ancestors or other intelligent beings, who knows? You decide for yourself. Then this one is really interesting. I'm going to try to go through this fast. I wish I could tell you the whole story, because it really is very interesting. I had just come back that Monday. I just walked in the door from the X conference. Steve Bassett, if anybody's heard of him, he's a very big disclosure person, and has done a lot in Washington, D.C. to help disclose the UFO reality. Anyway, I was at this speaking at this X conference, and I walk in the door, the phone's ringing, and I pick up the phone. This is how the media has changed and come a long way, because when I came forward in 2004, and they used to call the person that had the pictures Dr. X, okay? I had done news reporting in the early 80s at NBC in Phoenix. And actually, another little coincidence is I had called a MUFON person the week before the mass sighting and asked to get together. We made an appointment for Tuesday. He had to cancel till Friday, and I come walking in with video in hand. Friday morning, I had no idea there was a mass sighting the night before. And he says, NBC's coming to interview him. I said, whoa. I said, I'm out of here. I don't know if it's military or a hoax or whatever, but it's not about me, and it's never been about me. It's been about the data. And I said, take a copy of the video and share it. And by 4:30 that afternoon, it was on every television station, and then a couple of other videos came forward. But anyway, I walk in in 2004, when I came forward, a lot of the people that I had worked with in the early 80s that are just starting out then, in 2004 were now the head of the news department at Fox and the head of the production at CBS, and they had all moved around, and they were had big positions. And they said, "You're Dr. X, well, come on over." And they have been amazing. I mean, just amazing, taking this so seriously. As you could see, I'm going to show you another couple of reports. But at any rate, I'm walking in the door from Washington, D.C., and the phone's ringing, and I didn't answer it, and I didn't. They said, "Dr. Kitei, do you see those lights out there?" And we're kind of nestled in the mountains, and it was actually in the northwest, and I couldn't see any lights at all because the mountains were obstructing it. He said, "We're getting calls and hundreds of calls, and we have to find out what's going on." And I figured, fine, most anomalies, and I have to make this clear, can be explained. Only a small percentage cannot, okay? So I figured, we'll find out. It must be, whatever. In the morning, I get awakened at 7 o'clock in the morning by one of the radio stations. "Dr. Kitei, can you be on in a couple minutes about the lights last night?" Well, I didn't know what happened. So I got onto the internet immediately, and here I see not only are people talking about it all over the place, but it was #1. I mean, this is at 7 o'clock the next morning on the Drudge Report. And the entire day, it was unbelievable, the media coverage from not only local, but I got a call from Fox in New York, Fox Network. They flew me on a red eye so I could be at 9 o'clock the next morning live with UFO historian Richard Dolan. If you've heard of him, he has wonderful data as well. And we did the show live, and I had to rush back. Right after I finished, I was back to the airport and coming back to Phoenix to do an interview for Nightline for that night. And in the middle of the interview, the producer says, "Wait a minute, I have this important call." And I see him, and he was like, He's a happy-go-lucky guy, and I see his face change, and he comes over to me. He said, "You're not going to believe this." I said, "What's the matter?" He said, "They just called to tell me that a guy came forward to say that his neighbor was sending off road flares on balloons, and that's what the lights were last night." Now, mind you, these were different formations. We're talking squares and triangles and whatever, and everything stopped. Everything just stopped. Everybody pulled out. It was just uncanny. That was it. They took the word for it. And by the way, the reporters in Phoenix did not take the word for it. They immediately went to the guy's house. He wasn't there. Kids were there, and he had said that he was doing it with kids. They didn't know anything about it. And the neighbors didn't see anything either, and it was in a drought. It was in a drought. In fact, we had major fires happening, and this guy that announced it to everybody that he saw his neighbor doing this said that there were flares coming off of it and all this stuff. I mean, what's going on here? And for days, and I'm telling you, the reporters were unrelenting. They wanted to find out what was going on. And finally, the guy opens the door, and he has like some road flares and balloons on his seat there. He wouldn't do it for them. They even tried to do it themselves, and it didn't work. Days later, and it was interesting because this was like really hot on the internet, the website Above Top Secret really looked into it and found out that the guy that announced it was career military. Now, and also people were talking that they had seen things for days before, so we don't know if something was going on for real, that the hoax was hoaxed or whatever, but the most important thing for me personally, and another real coincidence here, is that we had our documentary that we were working on for a couple of years. We finally got a distributor in December who decided when he was going to release it, which was a Tuesday. And he picked a date and said it would take some time to get it all together because at the time Blockbuster and Hollywood video was still out there, and it would give him a chance to put it on the shelves. What date was that? April 22nd. The very next morning after this sighting that raised so much interest, our video was flying off the shelves. I mean, I'm sorry, but that was, whoever did it, it doesn't matter. It was a blessing for us and a blessing for people that wanted to find out what the Phoenix Lights were. Okay, here's in Ohio, there's another triangle. Here's another picture in Ohio. This was interesting, the Stephenville sightings, and important sightings, very similar to the Phoenix Lights, started in February of 2008, and they described it the same way. And it's interesting that they said they were pulsing red-orange lights, because this is a video that Steve Blonder, who called MUFON up to his balcony, had caught of these orbs. So you can see what they look like. They're like spinning bowls of energy. It's really fascinating when you look at the data. And what's also fascinating is that when I started really looking, I started finding that NASA, okay, has pictures of the same thing that they've gotten out in space. I'm going to show you a video of that. I'm also going to show you a month after the mass sighting, there was daylight sightings. People ask me all the time, why aren't there daylight? There's daylight sightings. There's daylight sightings, okay? You're just not looking up at them. But when people go out there, and actually there was an elderly couple that saw these and got video of it, you're going to see that. And then the last one, it's interesting, as the story progressed, okay, I called every military base, and I have some of the conversations which are quite comical in the book. They were more interested in seeing my data than giving an explanation for it. They were just as curious. And I get a call a month after the mass sighting from the head of PR at the Air National Guard. She says, "Oh, Dr. Lynne, I think we know what those lights were back in March." I said, "You do?" She says, "Do you believe that in all these months, nobody ever looked at the log for visiting Air National Guard, and the Maryland Air National Guard was in town sending off flares in Operation Snowbird," which, by the way, means diversionary tactical maneuvers, and it's been a diversion ever since, whether they did it or not. And she says, "That must be what some people saw." And I said, "Wait a minute, when was the Maryland Air National Guard in town?" She says, "March 1st to the 15th. I said, "Were they in town in January?" She said, "Oh, no." I said, "Are you sure?" She says, "Absolutely not." I said, "Well, I have 35 millimeter photographs of the same exact phenomena in the same exact location
confirmed the next morning, both in January and the morning after the mass sighting, as hovering over Class B restricted airspace, 1,000 feet altitude. And she says, "You never told me that." And then the next thing I said, well, wait a minute. And by then I had educated myself to anything that was possible and logical, as including flares. And I said, you're trying to tell me that flares cannot keep a formation, that just fall with the wind haphazardly, have huge smoke trails that are illuminated by the flare itself and are meant to illuminate the area around it, which not one witness to the true unknowns has described, by the way, to date. I said, you're trying to tell me that it traveled in rock solid, equidistantly formed, mile-wide V formation for hours? And she says, I have a call coming in, I'll get back to you. Well, I'm still waiting. Anyway, I'm going to show you these three because the last video I'm going to show you was actually a company came in town to do a program called The Anatomy of the Sighting. It wasn't supposed to be about the Phoenix Lights, but it ended up to be like 2 hours about the Phoenix Lights. And I actually decided to show the producer that there's other data that happened before the mass sighting, and he didn't want to hear about it. He just said, oh, they were flares. I said, but look at the data. There's so much more to the story. Wouldn't even look at it. Wouldn't even look at it. And it was on the Discovery Channel over and over, and then the Travel Channel, and then the History Channel over and over. And you're going to see what they did.
What you're about to see is amazing. It was taken from the Space Shuttle Columbia during a mission last December. So far, everything is normal. Then, the unknown objects start appearing. In higher speeds, look at what they do. They converge. And they form a triangle of light. The astronauts were sufficiently interested in these three objects that they went and zoomed in on them. Jim Delatoso thinks these objects are intelligent and could be related to the lights seen over Phoenix back in March.
New footage of those lights, and it's daytime video this time. Jim Shaybelt shows us the exclusive pictures and the story behind them.
More lights seen in the sky near Phoenix, but these lights appear in the daytime, about a month after the massive sighting over the city. This sighting shows two brightly lit objects hovering in the evening sky. One light blinks out, and another one appears, jumping around, while a third object tracks across the top of the screen at a very high rate of speed. Even UFO critics have a hard time explaining this sighting as bombing flares over the Barry Goldwater Range. For one thing, this sighting was made in the daytime when flares aren't used. And for another thing, this sighting was made in this direction toward the Estrella Mountains. But from here in Rainbow Valley, the Barry Goldwater Range is that way. The mystery of the lights was reignited by a 1-hour TV special last week on the Discovery Channel. In that program, a California optics lab compares Kristen's nighttime video to the same scene taken during the daytime. Their result shows the lights above and beyond the mountains seeming to disappear as they fall out of sight over the bombing range, supporting the flare theory.
And he really stretched the imagination to bring this thing in.
Kristen watched the program and questions it. He thinks the lights were lower and in front of the mountains. So we test the footage ourselves. It's a simple test using daytime and nighttime footage, both taken by Kristen using the same camera at the same location. We compare positions of the lights.
This is the first time I've seen this, and it didn't take long to do this at all. And just going from matching the shots up, going from one to the other, lights are in front of the mountain.
Why the discrepancy between our test and theirs?
He changed the position of these lights so that they would coincide with this peak over here.
He actually altered the footage.
How else could he do it? This light was always here, remember that?
If these aren't flares, are they over the bombing range? Or has the footage been altered? And by whom and why? The mystery continues.
Other sightings over Phoenix earlier that night also remain unexplained.
By the way, the craft that I'm going to show you in a sec has never been addressed.
Okay, but let's get rid of the flare theory once and for all, okay? We can see the difference between the true unknowns and flares. I mean, they're not even close. And here we go. This is my pictures. This is the boomerang. Here's flares. Okay, 3 years later, Vice Mayor of Phoenix, Councilwoman Frances Barwood, was running for Secretary of State on a platform to get answers about the Phoenix lights. And she was asking fervently for a reenactment. All of us were. Now, I knew that I had data, not only before the mass sighting, but after the mass sighting, of the same thing in the same spot. So whoever did it multiple times. Do it again. Show us that it was military. Now, shame on them for denying it so long and going over people's heads. But nonetheless, if it's military, okay, I'm open. Well, this is what happened. Right before the 3rd anniversary, they announced publicly, big time, that 3 Air National Guards, New York, California, and Michigan, were coming into town to show everybody the Phoenix lights. You decide.
3 years after the 1997 sighting, the Arizona Air National Guard staged this demonstration, saying the lights were military flares.
We all got calls asking where our aircraft were that night. We all checked and none of our aircraft were in that area. But as we looked onward a couple months later, we found out we had visiting aircraft.
But the demonstration didn't settle the debate.
And I have to say that it just didn't make it. For anyone that had seen the true mass sighting, it was a joke.
Flares like these put off smoke, and witnesses say there was no smoke associated with what they saw. So now, more than a decade later, the lights remain a mystery, but one that Kitei says deserves a closer look.
So the data speaks for itself. I just urge people to look at the data, and that's one of the main reasons I came forward. If I can be a credible voice so that people actually look at the data, then I've done my job.
I'm really trying to do a job here, I have to tell you. I have tried to cover all bases with trying to just get the information out there, and I really appreciate that you guys are here today to learn about this, because it's such important data, don't you think? I mean, it needs to get out in the open, and we need to address it and accept it and study it so we can move forward. And some of the things that I'm doing, I'm working on a curriculum right now for kids that's groundbreaking. There is nothing in our classroom. In fact, that's what prompted me to do the movie in the first place, because while Steve was trying to get me to do it, and luckily I called everybody that I wanted to be in it, and everybody said that they would, which was an amazing sign, because I didn't know if they'd come forward. I didn't for 7 years. But then I was invited to a school. Some parents had seen me at a Barnes & Noble presentation, and I was floored that a school would even let me in the door with this topic. And I walk in, there's 200 middle school students and parents and teachers. You could hear a pin drop. Kids thirst for this knowledge. And I realized for the first time there is nothing in our history books about this. So we've been working on this for 5 years. We'll keep you posted. Phoenix Sites Network packed with stuff, and the Geospatial Animation Project. I'm going to run through this quickly because of time, but it is on the website, and it's also in the bonus features on the documentary. A 12-year compilation from thousands of reports from the National UFO Reporting Center in Seattle, Washington, Frances Barwood, Village Labs, and Arizona MUFON came to the conclusion that there were 9 different craft. One just came forward last year, but 9 different craft. And again, whether it was just one craft that could morph, or the perspective from where the person was standing, or a parade, but what they thought when they really looked at the data, there were so many things, multiple things going on at the same time, that it had to be a parade. And here's just some of the different craft, and they're very different. I mean, some of these are very different. Here again is the craft that was seen in St. Petersburg, Russia, 1 month before our mass sighting. Here's another craft. I mean, it's amazing when you look at it. This is the craft that the hospice people saw, as well as Symington. The triangle craft with 3 lights at each end. Here's another one, very similar to Belgium and the UK. And then this one, And even here we have a disc. One of the triangles actually broke in two, and both of them just shot up in the air. This will give you a little taste. Larry Lowe, who did these illustrations brilliantly, also made this video, and there's a couple more on the website for you, on the GAP page, Geospatial Animation Project, but it'll give you a little flavor of what it felt like for the witnesses.
This is a forensic recreation of the Sky Harbor Triangle that was first reported near Carefree around 8:15 and was last reported near Sky Harbor at 8:40 p.m. The path of the craft has been pieced together by combining reports of similar objects. We begin with a view from the intersection of Lone Pine and Scottsdale Roads, 2 miles away from the craft as it hovers 1,000 meters over Lone Pine and Pima. The craft, depicted as 2 miles wingtip to wingtip, proceeds east down Lone Pine Road. The view moves to the intersection of Jomax and Tatum Roads, 3 miles south of the next sighting at 8:26 p.m. at the intersection of Lone Pine and Cave Creek Road. At this point, the object began a heading change and turned to the south. At 8:28 p.m., a report from a material site on the East Cave Creek Road put the craft halfway through the turn. This view is to the west from a point above Jomax and Tatum, roughly 3 miles from the center of the craft. At 8:30 p.m., Max and Shala Saracen reported the craft near Craig Creek and Pinnacle Peak Roads. This report included UFO occupants seen in the windows of the triangle, which they described as at least 2 miles wide. At 8:35 p.m., the craft was observed from the intersection of North 32nd Street and East Shade Boulevard, proceeding south towards Squaw Peak, where it was last seen entering the Phoenix Metropolitan Valley. At 8:37 p.m., the craft was observed by Terry Mansfield and members of her hospice group on the south side of Squaw Peak. The next vantage point is the first publicly shown recreation of what then Governor Fife Symington would have seen as the object flew over Squaw Peak. At 8:40 p.m., the craft was reported from 36th Street in East Washington, where it hovered short of the northern edge of the airport perimeter. The final view is a recreation of what the tower crew would have seen had they been looking due north. Some reports had this craft departing directly vertically, a truly astounding conclusion to a truly astounding series of observations.
Pretty amazing, and I always say, keep looking up. But it's a double entendre. There's a double meaning to this. And I have a whole nother presentation, maybe I'll do that another time for you guys, and I really go into it into the book, because what was really interesting, not only the nuts and bolts of the phenomena is really important in itself, but how it affected people in real time and long term. You know, the movie Independence Day was real popular about 6 months before the mass sighting, and as Dr. Gary Schwartz said, if you're inundated with threat, and harm, how do you think you're going to feel when you see something coming towards you that's super gigantic? Well, children were initially frightened, jumping up and down, Independence Day, but as it came closer, what was amazing is that a calmness came over everyone, adults and children alike, a connectedness to the phenomena that the kids wanted to run after it and have their parents get in the car and run after it. And long term, we have people that went into the peace movement and the environmental movement, changed their eating habits, won't eat meat anymore. I mean, really, it just woke people up, and that's really significant. One of the other significant things, and I go into this much more detail in the book, but one of the other thing that really got me was that a number of witnesses had had near-death experiences as children that was reawakened by the mass sighting. And that got to me, because I did too, when I was 8 years old. And I won't have time today, but I go into it in detail in the book. But I came away from it changed forever. I thought everybody knew the secret. I thought everybody was empathic and psychic. But I also came away with 3 things, and if I could leave you with them today, if you take away these: awareness, attitude, and appreciation. Awareness, being awake to what comes before you. Do you take advantage of that opportunity, or do you blow it off? How about that person that you meet? Just being aware of what's going on in your life. Being awake. Attitude, positive attitude. And as a physician, I've seen how positive energies and negative energies affect your body and your mind and the people around you. It's like a pebble tossed into a pond. It's very okay? Positive, being positive and having a positive attitude translates into a positive life. Try it. Appreciation. The old adage that I don't have shoes, and I cried because I don't have shoes until I saw a man who didn't have feet. Appreciate every day. At the end of the day, just a little aside, write a little note about what you appreciate that day, the people that you communicated with, the opportunity that came before you, the clouds, our earth, our beautiful planet, our beautiful planet. Jim Delatoso, I asked him, why do you think they visit us? He says, because it's a vacation planet. It really is a beautiful, beautiful planet, and there's so much to appreciate here. But there is much more to this story, much more. And I'm going to give you a little tidbit right now, okay? Because I really get into, by the way, the fact that when I realized that there might be a connection between all unexplained phenomena, be it near-death experience, out-of-body experience, unexplained aerial phenomena that have a mystical light associated with the experience, when I started looking again, I started finding such incredible, credible data. At university level, the Omega Project by Dr. Kenneth Ring, it's like this thick. I made it very simple in the book. And we have other scientists throughout the world, including Dr. John Mack, if you've heard of him, who was at Harvard, postulating and actually finding data that was so substantial that the experience itself, no matter what the unexplained phenomenon, is very similar, and I lay it out very simply in the book, but the after effect is so positive. The enlightenment, the awakening, the connectedness to the earth and to the universe and to each other is felt in a person, within that person, to such a deep level. It is really poignant and powerful. And I started calling all unexplained phenomena UP and up, because it is an up. And I hope that you'll read more about it in the book. But getting back to these pictures and the hard data, I told you we were going to get back to the closed sighting in 95. Well, when you saw the sighting in 98, we had video. I had alerted the other videographers to be on alert, and it was unbelievable. I mean, we had a 20-minute array of straight lines and mirror images, and the final thing was the triangle, and now we had data that was taken at the same time, because mind you, on March 13th, that could not be triangulated, because we all took video. Not only were they different video, looked different, but they were at different times. But now in 98, we had the same video. Everybody took it from a different vantage point, north, south, east, and west. That was a little coincidence, and we just happened to be north, south, east, and west. Sent the video to Dr. Bruce Maccabee, Navy optical physicist, for analysis, and as an afterthought, I sent the first and last picture of the 95 sighting and asked him, you know, would you mind looking at this? Maybe you can tell me what those close orbs were. And he calls me back about 2-3 weeks later. He said, you told me that that close sighting was only a couple minutes long. I said, right. He said, are you sure? I said, that's what I remember. He said, ask your husband. Now, mind you, as I mentioned at the beginning, each person reacts differently to these things. Well, my husband would never talk about it. He didn't want to hear about it. He got anxious when I brought it up. So I stopped talking about it. And I told him that. He said, you've got to corroborate it. And I sat him down. This was 3 years later. I sat him down and I said, look, we don't have to talk about it. Just do you remember how long that close sighting was? He says, I don't know, 2, 3, maybe 4 minutes tops. I go back to Dr. Maccabee, tell him that. He says, that's impossible. I said, what do you mean? He said, look at the pictures. Well, first of all, he confirmed these are the same exact phenomena. When we were looking at the closed orbs, the same exact phenomena, again here, remember the skylights? This is where South Mountain and the Estrellas are intersecting. The same phenomena was in the same exact location as 2 months before the mass sighting and during the mass sighting. But he said even more unusual was that the skyline in the first picture had many more lights, groups of lights on, that were off in the last picture. He said that doesn't happen in a couple of minutes. In fact, he did a major analysis, which he redid again with even more sophisticated technology a couple years ago for National Geographic, of all the lights that were on in the first picture that are off, the groups of lights. in the second picture. He said, I want you to do an experiment. He says, go outside, try to stand at the exact same location that you were standing in 95, take pictures of the landscape, the city skyline, every 15 minutes, and we'll see when the lights start going out. Now, I usually take a bath when we're home between 7 and 8, so let's be conservative, and 8 o'clock the starting point. The groups of lights start going out at 9 o'clock. The last picture is indicative of 10:30, 11 o'clock. He asked me if he could present it at the MUFON International Symposium. I said, as long as you don't use my name, and kindly he did not, and kept me anonymous. He said, from thorough analysis of the data, there were hours that passed between the first and last photos, not minutes. And he presented it at the 1999 MUFON International Symposium in Washington, D.C. as a first, and as far as we know, the only authenticated photographic evidence of missing time. Now, the reason that I just shared it for the first time in the latest edition of the book was because we have come so far, and we're still primitive. I mean, as far as time goes, our concept of time, past, present, and future, is primitive. That's not what time really is. And maybe this data can open the door a little bit so that scientists will actually look at that fact. And also, now quantum physics and quantum mechanics is talking about string theory, bubble theory, that there's 10 or 11 different dimensions. Well, if there's other times and spaces along with ours, then why is it so difficult to think that maybe there's other intelligences in those other times and spaces that we get glimpses of if we're open to them or invited? Think about that one. He also said, perhaps the most important result of the Phoenix Lights is that they turned Dr. Kitei on to do the things, books, documentary, whatever, into things that I would have never, ever, ever done. I mean, talk about being inspired. Something inspired me. I had to do this. I don't need to do this, but I needed to do this. And he said, my efforts bring a message to the public. And there's many, many people. I'm not the only one. I'm just a small little cog. There's people with messages worldwide, and they're starting to be heard. And one of the other messages that I got personally, well, first of all, whether they're anomalous phenomena giving us messages from beyond or triggering these inspirations, we are masters of our own universe. We have free will. Just like my husband didn't want to hear about it, I had to hear about it. I had to learn more. We are masters of our own universe. And turning something that's possible into something real. And I'm now working on this wonderful curriculum called Out of the Box, The Adventures of Sue F.O., Field Observer, and Hugh, H-U-G-H, Hugh F.O. And he's a little alien, and it is really going to be far-reaching. It's like amazing. We don't have time to get into it, but anybody that's interested, please contact me. It's going to be unbelievably groundbreaking. And working with a Disney illustrator, he's fabulous. The documentary has won over a dozen international film festival awards. Really proud of that, which is unheard of for a documentary, especially one of this genre. And the book has so much more. Needless to say, there is much more to this story. But one of the important things in there that I want to leave you with today is the message itself, because 1 month after the mass sighting, by the way, after the mass sighting, there were a number of very, very strange paranormal things that happened that I share in the book as well, and this is one of them. A month later, hours after the couple had gotten daylight footage of these phenomena that I showed you, something happened that I'll let you enjoy it in the book that just blew my mind. I mean, thoughts were going through my head after this experience that were like so foreign to me that I had to write them down. And almost in a trance, I went downstairs, picked up a pad and pencil, and just kept writing and writing and writing and writing off the page. The next morning, a couple of the investigators came to the house to take some measurements and stuff, and as we were going through the house, I remembered that I had written something. I didn't even remember what I had written. And I read it to them. I have not changed one word of this. Would you like to hear it? Yeah. This was a gift to me that sent me on this journey that brought me here today, and I'd like to share that gift to you. I don't know about other living creatures in the vast universe, but questions keep permeating my mind about the ones who are trying to get our attention now. What if these beings are as advanced spiritually as they are technologically? And what if they want to share this beautiful and wondrous future with us? And what if they have already met our spirit world and know firsthand that the essence of who we are is pure? They may be only trying to help us recognize the positive spirit deep within and teach us for who we are, really are, before we destroy our world. Each and every one of us is a powerful being with the strength and wisdom to deeply appreciate our earth and every living creature on it. It is time we view ourselves in a new light. This can begin by searching within ourselves to find goodness and love, so that the consciousness of humankind can elevate spiritually above petty differences, envy, greed, lies, hatred, abuse, violence, and fear. That is our destiny. But only if each one of us chooses to look within our own soul for the answers. They are there. It isn't too late. Humankind can begin this very moment to learn and grow so that our future will benefit from our newfound knowledge, not be pulled down by our self-serving primal ignorance. It is so very important to look within yourself and to believe in yourself. Judge yourself each and every day. There will come a time when you will judge yourself every moment of your own life. The good things, the bad, the kindness, and the wrath that you and you alone have brought to other human beings, other living things, to our earth. You will feel what it felt like to be on the receiving end. Near-death experiences have told us time and time again that when we die, we go through a life review. God does not judge us. We judge ourselves. So maybe we should judge ourselves now. Think clearly about how we treat others, the energy and dedication we put into our relationship, especially our family, as well as our relationship to other living things we touch in a short but precious existence. So when our time does come, we won't have to endure pain and sadness, but rather we will be drenched in the ecstasy of our own love, in the magnificent light of love. And if each of us truly looks deep within, the positive energies emanating from the goodness each one of us possesses will be shared around the world. Then our beautiful journey to a new reality will have begun. And this is Jaime Musan.
I'm going to prove that this is true. Not the scientists, not the authorities, not the military. Only hundreds of thousands of people with our cameras in our hands are going to be able to produce the evidence that is going to be seen around the world and is going to prove that this is real.
So the next time you look up in the sky, I hope you'll think of the Phoenix Lights. People ask me all the time, why did they come here? Not only to wake us up to their presence in a gentle, non-threatening way, but to wake us up to our true potential as human beings, to make this world a better world, and touching one person at a time. I hope the Phoenix Lights touched you today. Keep looking up. Thank you so much. I'll be out there. We have plenty of DVDs if you'd like me to sign them. I'd love to do that or discuss. Thank you so much for being here and for listening and taking such a long time. I really appreciate it. I'm sure you want to go get a potty break, as I do. But thank you again. And really, if anybody wants to communicate with me at all, please go to the website. Contact is right on top. I love hearing from people. And your story will be safe with me. And again, keep looking up. Mwah. Thank you.